Now, the sub-Saharan region, right, is believed to be one of the most resource-rich areas or land masses that you can find in the world, right? But when you look at particularly the southern African region, right? I'm speaking about the areas which you find south of the equator, right? Particularly this area has been found to be resource rich, right? But in this specific video, we'll be particularly speaking about the uranium resources that this region has, right? Now, be it in Angola, right, in Zambia, in Mozambique, right, or Lesotho, this region has been found to be rich in a resource that is known as uranium. Like in South Africa, a report was released in 2023 that states the size of recoverable uranium that is available in the country, right? The size stands at about 320,000 metric tons of recoverable uranium. And in Botswana is believed to have one of the most biggest undeveloped deposits of uranium known as Letlhakane uranium deposits. And of course, in Zimbabwe, you can find huge uranium deposits in a place known as Dibwe, Mutanga corridor, which you find towards the north of the country in a place known as the Zambezi Drift Valley. In 2021, a report was released in Namibia that stated that Namibia has about 470,000 metric tons of recoverable uranium. In 2022, Namibia was classified as the third largest producer of uranium in the world. And in 2023, Namibia sits comfortably in position 4, right, as the fourth largest producer of uranium in the world. So in Africa, Namibia is the number one producer of uranium, right? The second biggest producer of uranium in Africa is South Africa. So this basically means that this region is very rich in uranium resources, right? So Namibia sits at fourth place, right, as the fourth biggest uranium producer in the world, right? And South Africa tends to have a varying degree of position. Sometimes it falls as a ninth biggest producer of uranium in the world. Sometimes it's eight, right? But it doesn't move further than being the 10th most largest producer of uranium in the world. So this region is very uranium rich, and we need to take advantage of that and use it to benefit and develop our economies in this region, particularly below the equator, south the equator. The EU Commission wants to classify investments in nuclear energy, particularly nuclear power plants, as climate friendly under two conditions. Condition number one is the fact that the nuclear plant must be built with the latest technical standards. Number two, this is condition number two, that they must be able to come up with a plan to deal effectively with the nuclear waste that the plant is going to produce. So now, according to these two conditions, my proposal for the South African nuclear industry is that they must use two types of reactors, nuclear reactors. The first type of reactor is the pebble bed modular reactor that has been designed in South Africa that uses helium as a coolant, right? And then use a reactor known as a can-do reactor. a reactor that is from Canada, right? That is able to use nuclear waste as fuel to produce electricity or heat. So basically, these are my proposal. These are my ideas to South Africa or the South African industry of nuclear, that they must just focus on these two aspects and these two pieces. Of this video will be basically looking at a type 4 nuclear reactor. This nuclear reactor falls under a class of nuclear reactors known as SMRs. SMR stands for small modular reactors. When you speak of small modular reactors, you are referring to reactors that are 300 megawatts and below, right? In this video specifically, we'll be discussing a type 4 nuclear reactor that has been designed in South Africa in the early 2000s, right? It was a government funded project under ESCOM, and the government funded the project with about 30 billion rand. The reactor is known as a pebble bed modular reactor, basically functioning at high temperature, using helium as a coolant and using a special fuel known as a triso fuel. Let me explain what a triso fuel is. A triso fuel, it is a spherical ball the size of a tennis ball, right? Basically made of ceramic. But inside the core, it has an enriched uranium in it, right? So basically, you take this ball and you place it inside the reactor. And when fission happens and when those high temperature reaction happens, the fuel burns inside that ceramic tennis ball like thing until the waste remains in the core of that ball, known as the triso fuel. In this way, these are very safe devices to use for fuel. They don't overheat. Even when you remove a coolant from the system, the triso fuel doesn't melt down or doesn't overheat to cause things like meltdowns, right? So basically, in this core, the reaction has a one direct cycle. Basically, you pump in helium gas into the heated reactor core, right? And then the helium gas in the reactor core turns into a superheated gas, right? When it turns into a superheated gas, then you send that superheated gas into something known as a gas turbine. When that gas turbine spins, electricity is produced. And then when the helium comes out from the other side of the turbine, it is cooled and then sent back to the reactor so that the cycle can repeat. In this way, you can produce electricity with only one cycle, right? As compared to the type 3 nuclear reactor, which has two cycles, right? So basically, the uses that you can have or that you can use SMRs for is number one, it's great for desalination because of its high heat content. And number two, it's great for hydrogen production, right? And there has been later developments to the pebble bed technology to add a second cycle in the reactor that will basically be used for processed heating, right? So the pebble bed has been used, has been designed in South Africa about in the early 2000s, and it's quite a great technology that South Africa has introduced. It basically places South Africa as a leading nuclear technology country in the 21st, discussing a small modular reactor known as a can-do reactor. Now, can-do basically stands for Canadian Deuterium Uranium, right? The Canadian basically signifies the place where it was invented and first built, and where most of the expertise of this thing actually lie. Right. Deuterium is known as heavy water. Right. Heavy water basically is formed when a proton and a neutron come together and form one atom, right? And then when you add an oxygen to that, it actually becomes heavy water, right? They call it heavy water because it's slightly heavier than normal water that we use to drink from the tap, that we drink from the tap. So that's what the deuterium means. So this deuterium is used as a coolant to cool down the high temperatures in the reactor, nuclear reactor, and it's used as a moderator. A moderator, it's used as a medium by which you can slow down neutrons, right? So that fission can occur, right? So that's what basically deuterium is used for in the nuclear reactor. And then the U stands for uranium, right? Now, the special thing about the can-do reactor is the type of fuels that you can use in the reactor. Number one, you can use natural uranium, right? You can use uranium that has just been mined, that has not been enriched, right? And just form pellets and put them into the suitable equipment, and then put them in the reactor and use that as fuel. You can also use nuclear waste in a can-do reactor, right? So you process the nuclear waste, and actually you can use that as fuel, right? So this would be a great tool to help in dealing with the amount of nuclear waste that's all around the world, that a lot of people really don't have a plan on what to do apart from just dig them in the ground and keep them there in a safe place, right? It also takes in a processed nuclear waste called MOX, right? A mixed oxide, right? So you process this thing, and you put it back in the reactor. So this is the very special thing about the CANDU, that it can use various fuels, and you don't need to actually enrich the uranium that has been used for fuel. So another special thing about the CANDU is that it is very safe to use compared to the type 3 generator reactor, which has caused a lot of problems in the past. So it's quite safe. Another special thing is that you can keep refueling the reactor while it's still on doing its duty, right? So you don't need to go to downtime to actually refuel like the current reactors at play. So the current reactors, you can have a reactor that's down for about 6 to 8 months, people just refueling. So with this reactor, you can continuously refuel the reactor, right? And the issue, there are two main disadvantages about the CANDU, right? Is first, to produce heavy water is very, very expensive, right? And then second is that if you're going to use nuclear waste and what's this? Use nuclear waste and natural uranium, it tends to have a lesser content of energy in it. So you need to constantly refuel. So it's constantly refueling. That's another issue with this. Now, the way you can produce heavy water to be used in a can-do reactor is basically through electrolysis, right? Basically subjecting normal water to an electric current, right? In such a way that the bonds change and form deuterium, right? So that is quite expensive, and that's the main issue about the CANDU. But it would be a very amazing tool, a very good tool to solve the nuclear waste on this planet ever since the boom started around the 70s and the 60s. Or in South Africa, we'll be looking at the Koeberg nuclear power station, and basically we'll be focusing on the reactor technology which is being used currently. So the type of reactor technology which is being used in Coburg is known as a type 3 nuclear reactor, right? Basically, this nuclear reactor uses water as a coolant and basically uses water as a moderator. When we say water is being used as a moderator, we basically mean that water is used as a medium to slow down the neutrons which are bombarded onto the fuel inside the reactor. So basically, what I mean, how a reactor works is when neutrons are bombarded onto the fuel, which in this case is an enriched uranium, right, in such a way that it separates the element and releases a huge amount of energy and also results in smaller elements, or slightly less heavier elements like plutonium, for instance, right? So basically, this is how a reactor works. So what a moderator does, it makes fission possible. It slows down the speed of the neutrons in such a way as to make fission possible, right? And then water is also used as a coolant. The water, after doing the moderation job, then is acts as a coolant, right? Basically, you send the water to the reactor when it is producing fission reaction and releasing a huge amount of energy. The water goes to the core and then gets superheated and basically, yes, gets superheated. And then this superheated steam, it is pumped to a heat exchanger, and then when the heat is exchanged, a cooler form of water also is pumped back into the core. So this is the first cycle which exists in the nuclear reactor, right? The second cycle which exists in the nuclear reactor starts from the heat exchanger. It takes the heat from the heat exchanger and then it turns another second water cycle in such a way that it produces steam. The steam, then we put in a steam turbine to produce electricity. So this is how the electricity is produced in a nuclear power station using a light water type 3 nuclear reactor. So basically, this is the type of technology which is has been used all over the world. It's the technology which was used in the Fukushima and the Chernobyl, right? Basically, there wasn't enough water to somehow cool the reactions, the fission reactions, and a meltdown started to happen, and a nuclear disaster occurred. So basically, this is the type of technology which is currently at play all over the world and in the power station at Koeberg in South Africa. To add, they are quite a big piece of equipment. They come in at a minimum of 900 megawatts. So they are big, they are complicated to build, and they tend to be compromised in terms of safety, as Fukushima and Chernobyl can be a great example for that. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.